now I want to introduce you to an individual of profound courage, a contender for truth, someone who has so inspired and captivated my heart in the last season. Ayaan Hirsi Ali is a Somali-born Dutch-American political theorist. She's a former member of the Dutch Parliament and a public intellectual. She rose to prominence initially by denouncing Islam's treatment of women and advocating for women's rights and civil liberties. Her 2004 collaboration with filmmaker Theo van Gogh on the documentary Submission was critically acclaimed and also provoked outrage, resulting in Van Gogh's murder at the hands of an Islamic extremist who objected to the film's critique of Islam's treatment of women. Pinned to Van Gogh's chest was a 5-page letter criticizing Ayaan's position and threatening her life. The courage came at a very high cost, and it still does for Ayaan, who has round-the-clock security, even to this day. It was in the wake of 9/11 that Ayaan broke with Islam and assumed a role in the new atheist movement, alongside the Four Horsemen, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, and Sam Harris, even becoming known by some as the Fifth Horseman. She wielded her personal experiences, female genital mutilation at a young age, a forced marriage, from which she fled Somalia or the Netherlands, as powerful evidence against religious absolutism, calling Islam the new fascism. But in late 2023, she surprisingly announced her conversion to Christianity, citing a need for spiritual solace and a belief that the JudeoChristian tradition is essential for addressing the challenges that are facing the West. She would later famously debate her former atheist friend and ally, Dawkins, on that point. And while I know she would characterize him, continue to be her friend, the debate was truly something to watch in terms of her boldness. Initially, she was criticized by some who suggested that her conversion was driven more by an ideological alignment with the conservative movement than a genuine spiritual belief. But her pursuit and knowledge of the truth, her boldness, and the way that she has studied the scriptures evidences a changed life, one that I can't wait for you to see today. Since that time, Ayaan has courageously served as a lightning rod, sparking debate about the role of religion in public life, the future of secularism, and the challenges faced by Western societies, including anti-Semitism and woke ideology. Ayaan is currently a research fellow at the Hoover Institution, founder of the AHA Foundation that launched in 2007 to protect women's rights, founder of Courage.Media, and is a best-selling author. And she is a brilliant, kind, authentic, and courageous advocate for common sense and Western values. She's forced illuminating conversations, debated some of Christianity's harshest critics, and caused countless individuals to search their hungry souls for true fulfillment. And she's also our sister in Christ. It's a privilege to have this conversation with Ayaan today. Please help me welcome Ayaan Hirsi Ali to the summit. Thank you. Bless you. Well, it's just been such a joy to get to look at your story and to understand it more. And I mean, I couldn't help but, even as I was preparing today, looking back at the many experiences that you've had that just demonstrate such tenacity and courage. And I was hoping that we could just kind of start at the beginning, because we do believe that God wastes no moments, that there are difficult moments that come in our lives, but he will use them for his glory. And so we just talk about what it was like to grow up in an Islamic family and just how that might have shaped your views and who you are.
So, Kristen, before we get into that, I would like to thank you for your leadership and for your courage.
Thank you.
I love this woman. And second, I think maybe the audience may want to know a little piece of our conversation before I came. I was going to perhaps join you remotely, because I have two small children, a 7-year-old and a 13-year-old, and a husband now, and he believes that we should put our family first. And of course, I wholeheartedly agree. But we live in these strange times. And so this is the choice we had. Should I come here and speak to you and hopefully who knows who else is listening? Or should I stick with our children, and I really believe in that. And I chose to come, and I persuaded my husband that bad things happen when good people do nothing about bad things happening. And good people always have a reason. Look after your children, go to your job, and so on and so forth. And it's not because we're bad people that we do nothing. It's because we are so focused on the good things that we take for granted that we end up just focusing and not fighting. And so I'm here because I believe you're here to fight to recapture the institutions that we lost. And I want to do my little part. And my husband is on a flight from Newark with our 2 little boys, and he's going to be fine.
Yes, well, thank you for that. We do want to have right priorities, but I think also discerning the moment is so important, and you've been critical in that. And in even shaping how we at ADF think about the work that we do, both on the international front and domestically.
Yeah.
Will you talk a little bit, so many in our audience aren't really familiar with Islam and just what that would be like. One, to even grow up in a foreign country, because many are Americans here, but also in an Islamic family.
So if you want to use the model of my story, my personal story, which is in the 1970s, I was born in 1969, November, so 1970s. I'm born in this country, Somalia, which had just become independent of British rule, Italian rule, and then there's a small place called Djibouti, French rule, which I don't think they've ever become independent. But my father was one of those people inspired by the story of America, came to Colombia and wanted to go back and establish a new nation state along the lines of America. He and the people who believed in that never got a chance, because this is the 1970s. Marxism got a better hand. And so when, in my early, like between 0 and 5, I'm with my mother and my grandmother, and I'm being initiated by my grandmother into clan and tribal life, and clan and tribal morality, which is pretty clear. Everybody has a role. Men have their role, women have their role. And as a girl, my role was to grow up to be chaste, to be obedient and not bring dishonor. This is an honor and shame culture, not to bring dishonor on the family. So at the age of 5 years old, my genitals were cut, scraped, and sewn. And that has a moral teaching. My grandmother's moral philosophy, which she grew up with, which is not a philosophy for her, it was practical reality, was, you are a virgin and you're chaste, and we come from a great clan, and to put you in the hands of a, potentially great husband, we have to make sure you're a virgin. Goods are sealed, and by the time, when the time comes for you to marry, it's going to be broken for everyone to see. And so that was the way she lived. And other than that, she taught me to cook, to clean, to make a fire, to obey, literally breaking my spirit as a human being, as a female, to submit to the code of the clan. This was then augmented by Islam, our religion. And in the 70s, again, when I go to school, the first school I go to is a Marxist school. I know what Marxist indoctrination is because I went to that school from the time I was 5 years old and 6 years old. And we were taught to sing praises to our president. If you came to Mogadishu in the 1970s and the 1980s, you would find huge pictures of Marx, Lenin, Engels, and our president, Mohammad Barre. And we were taught to revere that, to reject our clan morality, to reject our faith, and to worship the state. And so that was my early years, and then we moved to Saudi Arabia. We didn't move. My mother sort of fled to join my father, who had escaped from prison. And Saudi Arabia at the time that is 1970s, Sharia law. And I remember with my little sister and brother, when the first time we went outside, we found women covered from head to toe in black. One of my childhood striking, and it's always there, is that there are these beings that are moving. They seem to be floating around. And as children, we're looking at them. We totally share a faith with them, but we didn't realize that. Suddenly the hand moves to grab a child, and we think, oh, they move. Or they have a face, or they talk, and very quickly I realized growing up in this country meant that is what it was going to be like to be a girl and a woman, to be covered from head to toe, complete shrouding, complete erasure and disappearance. I thank the Lord that in that year, we were only 12 months. My family was only for 12 months in Saudi Arabia when we were deported. And that is something I can only be grateful for, that we were deported, because had I grown up in Saudi Arabia, I would have been one of those shrouded beings.
Wow.
And then I move forward and I go to Ethiopia, which was also a Marxist country with I think we are threatened again by Marxism, so we'll get to it later in our conversation. But we move on. But it was my first encounter with people who are not Muslim. And what is important in my process was looking at my mother and my grandmother and the way they reacted to the Ethiopians. My mother and grandmother were hostile. It's what you guys call racist. They had only prejudice and bad things against these people. But the Ethiopians welcomed us. They were warm and they were wonderful. And all I remember, in fact, very briefly going to school in Ethiopia, was maybe a small slice of what it was to be a child, to be carefree, to run around and rubbish around. And then very quickly, in 1980, we moved to Kenya, and Kenya was a former British colony. That's where I learned to speak English, and we lived there for a decade. And it's in that decade that I made sense of the world through education. One thing I'd like to share with you is my father's role in the family. Even though he was absent, he left us 1 year. He went away in 1981-82, once he established us in Kenya. But he insisted to my mother that his daughters go to school. My mother was completely committed to the clan honor and shame paradigm, which was these girls are going to become good wives later on. He said, I want them to go to school. I don't want them to be illiterate like you. I want them to learn to read and write. And she held before him and she said, you know, when they get into puberty, they could bring shame upon you. And he said, I will take a risk. And she said, you will take the risk, but you are not here. So it will be my problem. I don't think they should go to school. My father said to my mother, I will curse you to hell, and you will dwell in hell if you take my daughters out of school, because I am the male of the family, and you know, the Muslim God listens only to men. And for that, I'm also infinitely grateful.
Yes, absolutely. I think hearing your story, it would be easy to think of you sort of resisting the Muslim faith, given its treatment of women as a girl. But from what I read from your story, you had some involvement with the Muslim Brotherhood and were really quite devoted as a child.
Yes.
And then there was a circumstance that then caused you to flee to the Netherlands. Will you talk about that?
Yeah, I wanted to be a good Muslim. I wanted to be a good child, a good daughter, a good student. I think most human beings really want that. I'll speak for myself. I wanted to be a good Muslim. And in 1985, when we have a movement, which at the time, obviously, I didn't understand. I was 15 years old. I didn't understand as a movement. But when these forces came in the shape of a Muslim teacher, a woman, Sister Aziza, and later on in our neighborhood, a man, Baqal Som, he who fasts 100 days, and they started to explain to us, what is it to be a Muslim? What is it to be a good Muslim? When this is the Muslim Brotherhood. And the woman, Sister Aziza, I think she was financed by the Iranian government. She was Shia. But what I wanted to do was to be a good Muslim and to understand it and to pursue to understand who is Allah, who is the Prophet Muhammad, what does the Quran say, what does the Hadith say, and try and live by those principles. And I tried to do that. And some of the problems I ran into constantly was you couldn't ask questions, you just had to obey. And as I got older, 15, 16, 17, 18, it became at times clear to me that I was being asked to obey the person sitting across from me, not so much to obey God. And questioning that itself puts you into problems. I became disillusioned. I didn't have the capacity to handle that, to treat it the right way. So I retreated into evasion as I got older. Meanwhile, I'm living in Kenya at this time. I'm reading Charles Dickens. I'm reading George Orwell. I'm reading Nancy Drews. I'm reading Robert Ludlum's. I'm reading Le Carre. I'm reading John Collins. I'm reading any kind of anything that presents itself to read. So I have this split personality where I'm trying to be a great Muslim. And on the other hand, as one of my teachers was saying, there is the pull of Satan, which is what he said of the West. We were listening to Michael Jackson. And what was his name? Dancing on the Ceiling guy. And R&B and all this stuff. Breakdance, do you remember that? This is Africa, we are poor, this is our form of entertainment, and this is trying to figure out, and I think in a way it gives you the reach of American culture into the depths of, and just the farthest corners of the geography of the world. But in trying to figure out who I am through this, I think in a sense, a rebellion in me was housed where I couldn't help but ask questions, couldn't help but stand up to these things. So in 1992, 10 years after my father left us in Kenya, he comes back and he sees not these little girls, but now these grown women. And he thinks, well, it's my responsibility in this honor and shame culture, I'm going to marry them off. And he chooses me to marry off because I come across as the most marriageable, the most submissive in some ways. My younger sister was very rebellious. My older sister was also very rebellious. And I just somehow came across as the one to go with. The civil war had started. So Somalia became independent in 1960. In 1969, Mohammed Siad Barre, the Marxist dictator, comes into power. And by 1991, December 31, 1990, the whole thing falls apart. My father comes back from exile. He's in Kenya. What is he going to do? Sew the whole thing together? No, he can't. He's at this point an old man who can't even marry his daughters off. And when all these Somalis come from the diaspora looking for wives, he finds me a husband, or the husband finds me, however. They go to the Great Mosque in Nairobi, and that's where they make the deal. And my father says, here, this is your wife. Wow. And I'm lucky, again, leaving Saudi Arabia, which was I had nothing to do with that. We were deported. I'm very grateful for that. My father, at the age of 11, insisting that I go to school and stay in school, very grateful for that. And by the time 1992 comes around, I'm 22 years old, not 16 years old or 17 years old. And the man I'm married off to is in Canada. And I have to go all the way to Canada. And in Holland, I decide I'm not going to go along with it.
Wow.
I'm going to, in Holland, in Germany, I decide to run away, but I also have the opportunity to run away. Yeah. And I take that opportunity.
I didn't realize that, I mean, I knew that it was a forced marriage that caused you to go to the Netherlands, but I didn't realize you were literally on your way.
No, the marriage had already been decided.
That you on your way to that, that's when you...
I had observed asylum seekers going off, and I thought, I can do that too, seek asylum. What does it take? And the whole exercise was an exercise in filling out forms. And you put on the form whatever you desire. You get a legal aid from the government of the Netherlands to tell you, put this in, put that in, put this in, put, and I did that.
Wow.
And they gave me asylum, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I want to make sure that we have time to talk about this moment. So as we're talking about the experiences you have, as I mentioned to the audience, Ayaan went and became a member of the Dutch Parliament, caused the government to fall because of her outspokenness on just the harms that Islam brings to women and the consequences for that. You made your way to the United States as a result and joined really the new atheist movement, and now have publicly stated that you are a Christian. I have to say, I talked a little bit about I was very disappointed when you first made the announcement, in this sense that I saw some Christians sort of come out and say, well, she talks about the JudeoChristian tradition.
Yeah.
But does she really understand the faith? Is this a true? And I just thought, one, none of your business. But two, faith works itself out. Sanctification is something that happens along the way. And but then I heard I don't know if you want to call it a debate or discussion that you had with Richard Dawkins, and he was really chiding you and saying, this is the God who's about sin. And how can you believe this silliness, the silly story of the resurrection? And when I heard your response, it was so clear to me that the Lord had done something in your life, because that's not the God that you have come to know. Can you just talk about that spiritual journey and maybe what you're learning, what surprised you about it, just whatever you would want to share?
Well, just like I wanted to be a good Muslim, I also wanted to be a great atheist. And I rejected Islam once I had come to figure out the moral core of Islam. I thought, this is not for me. And I fell into atheism because atheism, I was reading Bertrand Russell at the time, John Stuart Mill. I was friends with Christopher Hitchens. I had met Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris. I fell into atheism because atheism was the opposite, I thought, of Islam. It promised reason, rationality, clarity of thought. And so for about a decade and a half, I just wanted to be the best atheist I could and give back to this world that had given me what I had, and to deny the existence of a God, to deny spirituality, to say it was all nonsense. All of you grown-ups here, you were just afraid to be in the dark, and you needed a comfort blanket, and that was the faith. And I was brought down to my knees in humility because I went through a period from at least, I would say, 2011 until 2022 of unexpected depression. Well, depression is the technical term that one of the doctors used. I became unhappy, discontented at a time when I'm getting married, I'm financially comfortable, I have children, I'm married to the man I love. I was leading the sort of life you would think it's what we all want, which is what I still have and I want. But why was I so unhappy? Why was I so depressed? What is wrong with me? I didn't turn to God because I had turned my back on God. I turned to science. I went to psychologists and therapists and psychiatrists. And one psychiatrist, you have PTSD, you have depression, you have this, they're prescribing pills. And this goes on, and I'm sedating myself with alcohol. I'm drinking more wine, you could swim in it. And eventually I go, it's the United States of America in the 21st century, and when the psychiatrists and psychologists don't know what to do with you, they put you in rehab. And so I'm in this rehab center in Utah, and this woman says, She listens to me. She listens to my whole story. And she says, you are spiritually bankrupt. That is what's wrong with you. Because physically, I'm healthy. Every examination returns a clean bill of health. It's all in my head. And what's in my head? It is a flood of thoughts, of fear, of anxiety, of self-loathing, of shame, of all, it's just horrible, and I just don't know how to shut it down. And what she says is, you're spiritually bankrupt. So who am I going to turn to? Am I going to turn to Allah? Am I going to turn to the Prophet Muhammad? No, I'm not going to do that. And she gave me a menu of choice. Here is Buddha. Here are all of these Asian gods. Here's New Ageism. Here is mindfulness and meditation. And I turned to Jesus.
Praise him.
And it seems as if it comes out of nowhere or nothing, but I think it was there all along. And it becomes more striking because when we go through the exercise of, is there a God? And if there is a God, who is he? And can you write down the qualities of these gods? And on one column, I'm writing down the values that I aspire to, I live by, that I'm failing. And the God, I said I wanted a God of compassion and of love and of reason. Before I get to the bottom of that list, I look at her and I say, it's Christianity. It is Jesus Christ. And she says, it's whatever you want. Because that is the world we live in. It's all a menu of choice, isn't it? But to me, it is much heavier than that. And then I turn to prayer. And I go and I pray and I say, if you are there, God, if you are for real, rescue me. Take me away from this black pit in which I am. And over a number of days, I did that, and I felt a connection. I feel to this day, every morning, that prayer is powerful. And I was rescued from that dark tunnel of just hurtling towards death. Yeah. And I'm in a good place, and I am only grateful. I feel a sense of deep gratitude, and I just want to share with you, I feel reconnected to my God, reconnected to my husband, reconnected to my children, reconnected to my destiny and my mission. It is what I am doing. It was what made me persuade my husband to say, I have to go to Orlando in person to tell this story, to say what you and all of us are worried about, that if we want to recapture our nation, our country, we have to go back to our foundational creed.
Yes, amen.
Yeah.
So that's an amazing story, and I think it encourages all of us, including those that are our loved ones or our friends who may be lost and experiencing these things, and to never give up hope that the Lord does things. It's not our own hands that have to manipulate circumstances, especially as parents, as my kids are making, I think I can control it, but yet God works in our lives. So it's a great reminder. As we think about where our nation is going and where the world is going, you've studied it, the experiences that you have given unique perspective. And I wanted you just to share for a minute. We were in an event where we first met together, and you just proclaimed that you were a Christian, and it was not a religious event, but that was the one thing I wanted to ask you. I didn't care about any of the rest of it. I just wanted to know, how does this happen? And so I said, something to the effect of what was it that caused you to reconsider atheism or what you perceive to be the secular values that you believe so much in? And I about fell out of my chair when you answered that. We'd never met before. I don't think you really even knew a whole lot about Alliance Defending Freedom. And for me, your answer will always serve as a milestone in my own faith about what individual people can do to affect the world. So we just share a little bit as we transition into the world and what's ahead with Islam and all the ideologies, into what caused you initially to say, I'm not sure that this is right, and opened you up to consider sharing.
Well, I thought atheism was the epitome of reason and tolerance. And I don't know if I was in the East Coast somewhere. And this whole story broke about some guy who didn't want to bake a cake, and some people were going to make him bake a cake. And I looked into the story and I thought, so these two people love one another. And it was right around the time, the whole gay people can marry had been accepted. Some of my best friends are gay. And when we came from Holland, for instance, my two lesbian friends were married according to the law in Holland, but when they came to Los Angeles, they were not. And we had now gone through this milestone where in America, their marriage was accepted. And lots of gay people were getting married, and there was this couple, and they wanted to get married. And do you know what I think of wanting to get married? It's like you bring in your best friends, and you celebrate this intimacy, this person that you love so much and that you want to spend the rest of your life with. That is the one thing you absolutely do not want to politicize. And here was this couple. You could have this capitalist nation of the world, okay? You could have a cake baked anywhere. But they wanted to have this man bake their cake, and they were going to take him to court, and they were going to humiliate him. And to me, it was illiberal, it was intolerant, it was the very opposite of reason. It was so grotesque, I couldn't understand it. And that was, I think, for me, the first time I thought the seeds of doubt were sown in my mind on why atheism is absolutely wrong. It reminded me of the Marxist schools in Somalia. It reminded me of Islamism. It is, we have our way or no other way. And later on, of course, I learned who this man, the baker, and Jack Phillips was, and I cannot, my admiration for him is infinite, because all he did was just stand in his faith and humbly stand in his ground, and his fortitude. That is the example, the inspirational example that he said. That is what I related to more than all my years of atheism. And maybe that's sort of what knocked me off my atheist days.
Can you believe that?
I would have baked that couple a cake, but they didn't want it. They wanted to politicize their union. And it's the opposite of what marriage is. It's the opposite of what weddings represent. It's just wrong.
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty amazing thing to think of what you referred to at the time as an obscure baker helping one of the leading atheists of the world reconsider her worldview.
Yeah. Good for him.
Well, I want to talk for a minute about just what we're seeing right now and what you're seeing. And I don't want to conflate the ideologies, so separate them out how you think is appropriate. But what I've been thinking about is what is the threat of Islam? Are we correctly assessing it? Mm-hmm. How does anti-Semitism weave into that? And then how does woke ideology weave into that? Like, just kind of give us your sense of the moment and why you have been writing vociferously and a lot on these three issues, because it's deep in your soul and your concern is very high.
Yeah. Wokeism is a perversion of Christianity. Wokeism is a perversion of the JudeoChristian heritage. Islam is a challenger. Islam is coming in to say, you are all wrong. We have the right creed, and we're going to replace what you have. Wokeism is something that's coming from the inside. I mean, some people want to go as far back as Rousseau, but people who reject civilization have always been there with us. Wokeism is neo-Marxism. Marxism failed, and in 1989, in America, we thought we celebrated the victory of political freedom and economic freedom, and I think we forgot to say, and Christianity. And winners always celebrate and move on and forget. Losers don't. Losers plot the next revenge. And I think what happened with, even though the Soviet Union fell apart, those people who believed in that ideology and who had planted the seeds maybe 60 years prior, 50 years prior. I mean, you have to read Alan Bloom's Closing of the American Mind. In our universities, in our schools, the seeds of subversion were planted. And wokeism is what was then cultivated and grew and grew, and it is what we are witnessing now, which is subversion that manifests itself in all of these various ways that we are seeing, whether it's the gender ideology or the racial ideology, or just the whole let's dismantle the system. The white heterosexual male Christian is the oppressor of all times. That is the ideology from within that wants to dismantle and destroy America. And then you have Islam, which is an external force, which has always been there. The clash with Islam is civilizational. And a civilization cannot stand without its foundational creed. Because Islamic civilization has Muhammad as the founder. If you don't know who Jesus is, if you can't defend his message, and I know it's not just Jesus, it's also Moses, it's the whole Judeo-Christian package. If you can't stand up to that and show and have peace through strength, then I think we're doomed. And the way to do it is also to acknowledge that from within us is this tumor, wokeism. And the tumor of wokeism has allied itself with radical Islam, political Islam. Maybe you don't even have to give it a qualifier. But that is what we are up against. And anti-Semitism, I understand the Islamist-driven anti-Semitism. It's very simple and straightforward, which is, if the message of Muhammad is true, then Judaism is false, Zionism is false, the state of Israel cannot exist. And the mission of the Islamists is to bring back the caliphate that was abolished in 1924. And for the Islamist caliphate to come back, Zionism has to be destroyed. It's the core challenge to it. And part of this way of trying to destroy Zionism and the state of Israel is to convince Christians and Christianity and the legacy of Christianity that Islam has to found an alliance with Christianity against Zionism. But to do that is to commit the ultimate suicide. This is a Judeo-Christian nation, not an Islamo-Christian. Islam cannot and just will not tolerate Christ, according to Islam, is a prophet and can never be the Son of God. The biggest blasphemy in Islam is when you're a little child as a Muslim, when you know what the Nicene Creed is, what that is for Islam is, Qul huwallahu ahad. Say that God is one. Allahu samad lam yalid wa lam yulad. He is neither begotten nor does he beget, which is a clear denial of Christianity and claiming that Jesus, that's blasphemous. So with that in mind, I think all the efforts that we have, the Catholic Church, the interfaith dialogues, all this, let us treat the Muslims of today and be inclusive, because we Christians are responsible for the Holocaust. That is the wrong kind of atonement. And that is what Muslim Brotherhood is making hay of. And this is what I want to warn you about. I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking, we've come to the end of time, but I wish we could talk a little bit more about trying to make you understand Islam as a civilization, as a culture, as a missionary work, the caliphate. The caliphate has to come back to Islamize the whole world. There will never be peace unless the whole world is Islamized. The only way, I think, having grown up in Islam and having understood it and understanding its mission, the only way the West, the Judeo-Christian West, can deter Islam is through strength, military strength. Military strength is the first part. Economic strength is the first part. But the most important part is spiritual strength. It's creedal strength. And the minute you water that down, we will fall to them.
So I've got two final questions for you. We are out of time, but I'm hoping they're into this as much as I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
So I don't want to cut it short. So when we think about that, you gave a speech recently at the art conference, and you were very clear, I think more clear than any other speaker at the event, that you viewed the Judeo-Christian worldview and Christian morality as essential to preserve the West. What struck me most about that speech was that you actually identified those Western values, but then you actually gave scriptural references in your speech for every single one of those values, which even, pastors aren't even able to do that typically, I mean, and in that room where you're dealing with a lot of people that aren't Christians, it was very intentional. It was clear it was very intentional. And you said that the West basically can't, the operating system of the West is the Judeo-Christian tradition and values, and that none of the apps will work if we don't retain that.
Absolutely.
I thought that was a great way of talking about it. What are the next steps that we should be taking, in your view, to try to reclaim these truths? We can't go back, and I don't think we want to go back. Like, God has a story, and that's moving forward. So looking at the world now, how do we live as a witness and bear witness to truth and reclaim that truth?
You have to come out of the closet. We have to come out of the closet. And we have to say and spell it out as clearly as we can, with no arrogance, by the way, no supremacy, any of that nonsense. But we have to come out of the closet and say, this is who we are, and go back to emphasizing and teaching this creedal. Start Genesis 1:27. We've been cowed the last 50 years into accepting and to be embarrassed about who we are as Christians. And Christians in America and in Europe have been told the only way to be a good Christian is to hide your Christianity. And we're paying the price. They came into our classrooms and they edited out the Bible, and they edited out the 10 Commandments, and they edited out the Sermon on the Mount, and we allowed it to happen. And they did the same in the universities, they did the same in the media, they did the same in the government. And in the name of tolerance, we allowed it to happen. And now is the time to say no more, because it is no longer about posturing. We are at a place where right now we're about survival. It's about it's about self-preservation. And our responsibility, those of us who have lived in America and in Europe and who have benefited from the fruits of what others fought for and died for, our duty for those of us in this room is to pass it on to the next generations. I came to this country and I was treated like a princess. I was given a visa, it's called O1. That's like the most preferential. I have no idea what I did for it, but the American Enterprise Institute, under the leadership of Christian Youth and the Board of Trustees, they brought me here. I lived here, I thrived, I prospered. All I can do in return is say, remind you, all of you, this is the legacy that people fought for and died for. And our job is to pass it on to the next generation. And we can't pass it on to the next generation by only talking to them about Amazon and comforts and this, that, and we have to go back to what made this country and what made 2,000 years of Christianity and European prosperity. And the only way to do it is to be truthful and to stand like Jack Phillips did for what is true. We have to recapture these institutions of education, the institutions that socialize the tender hearts and minds that have now been captured by the Marxists and about to be claimed by the Islamists. And if we don't do that, we are betraying those who fought for us, and we are betraying the next generation.
And I know, last question, I know we've talked about where does hope come from and what is your hope? And we can bemoan the next generation and the education that they've had, but where do you have hope and why?
I have hope in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I say it again intentionally because I know this is the sort of thing we're not supposed to say. I'm a sinner. I sin all the time. I'm weak of flesh and of mind and of everything. But every morning when I get up and I pray, I look at my God and I say, I'm a sinner, forgive me, that gives me peace of mind and gives me the strength to go on. And I think we can't be ashamed or embarrassed about saying this and passing it on. Somewhere in Oklahoma, I was reading in the news, they want to bring back the Bible. That's the way to go back. You cannot understand Western civilization without reading the Bible. Actually, in the short period that I have become a Christian, when I now go to Italy and Greece and these in the United Kingdom, France, and I look at these amazing works of architecture and art and music, for the first time, I fully appreciate these works. I never appreciated them as an atheist. And as a Muslim coming in, I thought, yeah, now nice little carvings there. Never got it. It's only as a Christian now that I'm beginning to understand the wealth, the deep wells of wealth, that these are expressions of worship. And do you know what happened when Europe left Christianity? You get the ugliest pieces of architecture. There is nothing there. So either we collectively commit suicide, or we stand up demographically, morally, spiritually, economically, militarily to the forces, the barbaric forces that are here, the woke, the Islamists, the Marxists. We better stand up to them while we can.